Hello, this is Dr. Scott Catino, and today I would like to discuss a very important subject, and I would like to do so in this video lecture entitled Developing Research Structure and Quality in the Security Field, an overview. This is part one of a series. This subject is just very important. So often students will come to their professor and ask questions on how to structure their research, how to develop a research process. And the question is more than just templating or formatting. The key issue is to develop a structure that is going to develop quality in research. And that is the key of what we want to talk about today. And whether you are a graduate student at Henley Putnam University, just beginning your studies, or you're working on your master's, or you're starting your doctoral dissertation, I think you're going to find this very important, both as a process and a way to develop the quality of your research. Okay, so what is our objective here? We have three objectives in this presentation. The first is to provide a basic structure for developing the quality of research in the security field. So structure is very important. We want to call attention to that. We also want to develop an understanding of the essential parts of the research process, which is sometimes called the scientific method. We need to nail that down and understand that clearly. And the third point is critical: to communicate the point that structure generates quality and does far more than create a template or an outline. And I think that'll be clear as we move forward into this presentation. Okay, what I have presented here are 7 steps that are not just a process, but act as interlocking or integrated systems into the process. We don't want to look at this as let's just start here with step 1 and proceed to step 2 and step 3. Yes, of course, there's going to be a system approach to this. There's going to be a process, but we want to see that we're developing qualities into the research similar to how we would look at the human body. We don't want to, in essence, see the many different systems of the human body as being separate and being isolated. They obviously are all very important, whether we're looking at the nervous system or the skeletal system or the circulatory system. We see that these are in essence interrelated systems that develop, or in essence give, the very quality of life and vitality to the human body. Similarly, when we look at the steps and process that we're going through here, we're going to find that each one of these steps builds a quality into the research. Now, if you look at the steps, they're easy enough to read: background, research question, purpose, hypothesis and theory, methodology, analysis, and conclusion. You may have heard of these before. It may have been presented before. But the corresponding area that I've italicized is very important to understand, because each of these steps seeks to build this very quality. First is familiarity. Now, this seems so simplistic to talk about, but how often have I heard students say that it really wasn't until the very end of their project, their research topic, that they gained a sense of familiarity to begin to even address the right questions. And thus, by the time they conclude their research, they find it's faulty, it's skewed, it's uneven. So we want to develop these qualities in our research: familiarity, focus, usefulness or utility, logical thinking, effectiveness of investigation, depth, and contribution. These are 7 qualities that should be a part of the research process, and these are obviously 7 areas that affect the overall quality. But the first step is the background. Students oftentimes begin to explore a subject, quickly develop some sort of research question, and are not familiar with the topic, and certainly are not familiar enough to ask the right questions. What I'm stating here is, before you can even develop a research question, before you can even know what are the right questions to ask, what are the valuable questions to ask, what are the critical variables, and we'll talk about each of these steps in more detail. This is just an overview. Before you can begin to do that, you have to take time to do a background investigation, reading sources, looking at a variety of sources, and begin to understand the players, the issues, some of the driving forces that are shaping outcomes. And from that familiarity, you will begin to ask the right questions, finding the utility or purpose of your study, and being able to move forward. That's critical. The second part is a research question. And the research question is just that. It is a very focused question that gives the entire paper a focus. It should be no more than one or two questions. If you find yourself, after you're familiar with the subject and doing the background, and you cannot sum up your research paper's focus in one or two questions, then you do not have focus and an effective research question. Research questions should be to the nature of, why have the Taliban been able to succeed in their financial support? Why has Hezbollah been able to project power globally? Why have the protests in Bahrain failed? Etc., etc. These are specific questions, one sentence or two sentence questions that allow you to focus in an area and create an achievable target, one that you can investigate and have research that will make a contribution. The third aspect is purpose, developing a purpose or utility in your research. What good is your research? What absolute value does your research have? Will it address a critical need? Will it provide something timely to the research community in the security field? Will it call attention to an emerging trend? Will it correct a mistaken view or myth? Will it give attention to an underreported variable that is of profound influence or considerable influence? It should have some sort of purpose more than just the vague, I want value added research in the security field. Find something more specific and a deep purpose. And that will not only, again, allow you to focus your research and bring out the value, but it'll also give you some sense of mission or inspiration in your research, which is value in creating the energy that's necessary to delve both deeply and consistently through your information and through your studies. The fourth step or part here is a hypothesis or theory. So as you develop a research question, you want to then say, what is a logical way of thinking about this as a topic with a possible answer? What possible answer to my research question can be developed? And sometimes it'll be just a series of guesses after you've explored possible approaches. Sometimes you'll find that theories have already addressed similar issues. This is where your background reading is so critical. And at this point, again, we don't want to just move sequentially. As you're looking at the hypothesis, you may go back and say, I need to do some additional research and look at some of the theories that explain urban insurgency, terrorism in a specific location, terrorism within a certain religious sect or group, and find the possible theories that are used to explain your very research question. It's important to approach it that way. So as you're proceeding through this and you've developed a background, you've developed a research question and a purpose and a hypothesis, you will see that your familiarity, your focus, the utility, and the logic are beginning to bring qualities out in your research that ultimately are going to be of high value. The next area I want to go over, not too quickly, because students often misunderstand this, and oftentimes even in textbooks this is not clarified. It's often blurred with theory or blurred with research approaches. But methodology should be looked at as a distinct area of your research. Methodology is simply the tools and approaches that are used to gain information, and thus it creates effectiveness of investigation. Now, this is critical in the security field, and I'm going to give some simple examples in order to clarify this subject. In the security field, you might be researching a topic. Let's say it's dealing with Al Qaeda's growth in the Arabian Peninsula, and you want to look at this topic. You may find that you're able to use secondary sources effectively, and your method of investigation, the tools you will use, will rely chiefly on secondary sources, individuals who have served in the military and who have written open sources and reports, and with some additional primary sources, speeches that were captured of Al Qaeda members in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP for instance, and some of their open source, and you will find that that may be enough to answer a particular research question. So therefore, your research approach would rely on the tools of open sources, secondary sources, people writing on this subject, and primary sources, the speeches of actual Al Qaeda members. That may be enough to furnish the information that answers your questions. And as you broaden your perspective and look into different areas, you'll say, well, yes, this is definitely valid information. In other cases, you may find that your topic cannot be answered by using either secondary sources, primary sources, but now watch this. You need different methods. You may have to go to the area and observe. Now you're incorporating field observations. You may need to actually conduct your own interviews with key individuals. Now you are bringing in another method entirely, using interviews as a method of gaining information. And we will discuss this in subsequent video lectures. So methodology is important, and often studies fail simply because the methods they are using are not effective. If you think for some of these security subjects that we're addressing that you can simply survey newspapers and begin to find the information that answers these essential research questions, what will oftentimes you will find that you are simply recycling rumor, misinformation, and an inability of individuals to analyze complex military and security events, issues of terrorism, etc. Your methodology, particularly in our field of the security studies, is very unique. It has to be more nuanced. We have to be more flexible in our understanding, and we have to strive to find the methods that are most fitting for our research question and our research project. Analysis. Analysis is developing depth. We want to ultimately have a study that cuts beyond the surface and begins to identify those critical drivers of outcomes, the subcomponents, the relationships between them and to the whole. That's how we develop depth. Your analysis part of your paper is the breaking it down and discussing those subcomponents, those critical parts, those variables that drive outcomes. And ultimately, you conclude your research by presenting your findings, and here is where you have a contribution. So if we step back for a moment and we look at these steps and the corresponding qualities we want to develop: familiarity, focus, utility, logic, effective investigation, depth, and contribution, what we have done is structured our study for success, for developing a quality research project. Let's reflect for a moment. Which of these areas and qualities have you used, omitted, neglected, or exploited in your research? Take a moment to answer that and think about your research projects that you have conducted. Have you used some of these, all of these? Which ones have you used successfully? And no doubt you have. Which ones have you omitted or perhaps neglected that could have changed the quality of your research? Let's reflect again. What are the consequences of omitting any of these in your research? Oftentimes, research is faulty. It is skewed. It lacks quality because one or several of these, or possibly even all of these. How many times has research been presented that is so superficial? It is not focused. It starts with a lack of a background investigation. The research question is so broad. It tries to cover large time frames, many groups, and thus just simply skims the surface. How many times does it lack utility? How many times is the analysis shallow and particularly the methodology poor? Again, this is critical to the quality, the outcome of your research. Okay, let's briefly review. What are the 7 steps of the research process? Yes, the background, which is very important. It's a starting point. We want to gain familiarity and begin to proceed from a position of knowledge. We want to develop a research question. That develops our focus. We want to stay focused so we can go deep. If we lose our focus, we lose our direction. Our information is going to be skewed. It's going to be superficial. There's going to be an imbalance in our research. Yes, and purpose. We want to understand what value our research has. And the hypothesis that we develop, the theories that we begin to test and utilize, will help our very reasoning, the very logic, the very rightness or falsity of our thinking. And we talked about methodology, how important it is to have the correct tools to gain information. Without that approach and the proper tools, we will never be able to mine the gold that we're looking for. We simply will be drilling too short or in the wrong areas and not be able to find what we're looking for. Analysis, the importance of going deep and understanding the critical variables that shape outcomes. And then ultimately our conclusion, the very information and takeaway that we're going to be able to present. Indeed, developing a structured approach to security research is important for developing quality. The 7 steps of the research process offer a valuable approach for developing the quality of research in the security field. Each step of the 7 steps develops quality of one's research and not just form. Thank you for listening to this presentation. And as always, if you have any specific questions on this process, developing your research process, particularly when you're writing papers, developing a thesis or a dissertation, please feel free to contact me. Have a great week.